Well,
Alrighty. Good evening. Today's September 6th, 2016. This is the New Durham Planning Board. It is 7:12 p.m. I'm Scott Drummy, the chair. And as usual, we're going to go around the room here and identify the rest of us for you all viewing at home. I'll start over here in the corner.
Jen Meadow, admin.
Bob Craycraft, Vice Chair.
David Swenson, Selectman Representative.
Scott Bizel, member.
Terry Chabot, member.
Okay. Next is a public comment period. If there's anyone in the public that has an item to add to the agenda that is not already there. Once, twice, hearing none. I'm going to make a little adjustment to the agenda here and move up our master plan update, housing and land use public forum. As we have a guest here tonight, Matt Sullivan from Stratford Regional Planning Commission. Matt, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I think, and I'm not totally clear on what my role is tonight, but I think we're really just trying to have a discussion about the housing section of the master plan. I know a few meetings ago I had attended, and you were talking about transportation at that point in time, and I've seen the content slowly be uploaded to the website, and my understanding is that this is next in the queue. And that's correct.
We actually did the one in between natural resources.
Natural resources went live too. And I think the goal tonight is to have a discussion maybe about some of the topics that might be included in the housing chapter. And I'm not going to talk too much. I'd rather kind of field questions if that's appropriate. But I've done quite a bit of housing work over the last 5 years or so. And I think it's sort of an interesting time for a lot of communities. A lot of communities updated their master plan housing chapters right after the year 2000. And obviously a little something happened in 07, 08, and 09 that changed the housing market in New Hampshire. And we're seeing some shifting demographics on top of that that are really, making it so the communities need to think more about what types of housing stock they're attracting in the community and what types of residents beyond that they want in order to sustain it into the future. So I think that's sort of what I'm hoping to provide some perspective on tonight. I can also comment on some specific legislative things if you'd like to discuss that. I know that there was some talk about the ADU legislation that came from SB 146. I can certainly discuss that in some detail, but I think, again, it would be best if I sort of take questions from you about this component. And I understand, I think I'm going to attend the actual forum when it happens at that time.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Based on our prior conversations, I had the impression, and maybe misimpression, but I think it was correct, that we were looking for you to more than just attend. We were looking for you to be fairly active in terms of helping facilitate and things like that. So,
yeah, absolutely. And I think
I want to make sure that was comfortable for you.
Yeah, I wanted to flush out that role a little bit tonight too, just to make sure that you all were comfortable and that I was comfortable. So I'm more than willing to help facilitate, and I've done quite a bit of that too. So I can certainly sit in that role. Okay. Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things, you've started off with a couple of introductory comments, which triggered some things for me, which might be of interest to lay as background for the forum part. And again, this is subject for discussion, and people can indicate whether they think it's valid or not to include it. But one of the things that from my perspective you indicated is that first of all, there was some fairly strong activity in many towns and cities after 2000 in terms of their housing and master plans and things like that. And then also 7, 8, and 9. Of course, 7, 8, and 9 is when some economic issues hit. So one of the things that might be helpful for the audience in general is to understand what triggered the 2000 activities, which for me, 2001, of course, we understand that, but there was fairly strong economic activity shortly thereafter.
Sure.
Until 7, 8, and 9, or more likely 8 and 9. But so what were those, and what was that impact on housing and master plan housing specifically?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if I'm playing a facilitation role, I think one of the things I'd definitely touch on is that New Durham and really Stratford County as a whole in this section of the state saw extremely fast housing and population growth. Really from even further back, 1980, 1990, 2000, all the way really until, I would say, the mid-2000s. And I would probably touch on that because I think that really sets the stage for what's happened now, which is not complete stagnation, but very close to complete stagnation. And in some communities even, and I'm getting into some of what I would discuss, I think, in some communities even in this region, we're expecting a decline in population growth, which is pretty incredible. With that said, Stratford County as a whole is expected to remain one of the fastest growing in the state of New Hampshire, which is a very strong sign. However, a lot of that is attributable to communities like Somersworth, Dover, and Rochester with their lower cost housing stock and more rental housing stock. And that sort of gets at a whole other issue that I think would be discussed, and that is sort of the shift in housing preferences, not just among millennials that you read so much about, but also among aging baby boomers that we hear so much about who are downsizing into smaller rental housing stock even, and obviously single family housing stock. So I think that, you know, it's easy to think about housing within the borders of your community, but so much of what's happening in the Stratford region is actually controlled by what's happening in the Tri-Cities area and the housing stock that's there. So I think that coupled with some historical perspective on the housing market and population trends, I think would be really critical to present at that meeting.
Okay.
So would you be then maybe introducing for 5 or 10 minutes, whatever the number of
Yeah.
X minutes, in terms of some demographic information,
Yeah.
saying, here's what the trends have been?
Yeah.
And one of the things which occurs to me by what you've just described as an example is that those trends in the larger communities
Yeah.
may cause residents and citizens who have more, I don't know if I'd use the word traditional, but more interest in owning their own property, larger properties, things like that, may be pushed to
Right.
smaller communities such as New Durham and things like that. So I mean, that, I don't know if that's a valid potential or not, but all I'm saying is maybe you want to look at take it to the next step of what does it mean to smaller communities.
And I'll say that's a big unknown actually.
Yeah,
So the
I
question
recognize
really
that.
is, you know, those baby boomers that are downsizing, what is the liquidity of their home? Can
Right.
they actually sell it in the housing market? And that's a question we don't really know the answer to.
Right.
What's interesting for me specifically as a millennial is that 3 to 4 years ago when I started doing a lot of research on this topic, the idea out there was that millennials simply didn't want to own homes anymore. Well, that's really not true at all. So I think what the newer housing market is showing is that it's just taking more time, and we know why. You know, student loan debt, family formation is occurring later in life, and those are all things that I can talk about at the forum because I think they're all important. But the question really still is one without an answer, and that is, will homes in a community like New Durham
Right.
continue to be attractive to younger demographics,
Right.
or any demographic at all? And the answer isn't clear.
Yeah. Well, the flip side of that is, from a
Yeah.
planning board perspective and others, is
Right.
what do you want to encourage?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think that's
Yeah.
kind of what
Yeah.
we want to
And I think the question, you know, the reaction immediately is, well, okay, let's say housing preferences are moving towards rental housing and smaller homes. Well, rental housing may not be compatible with a lot of communities, but whether it be allowing for accessory dwelling units that may allow for seniors to remain in their homes up
Right.
here, that might be one solution. And I think
Right.
that's why we saw this legislation come through the state. That was really not only a solution for millennials who want to live in those in-law apartments, but actually for older couples and
Sure.
single older residents to actually move into them and rent out their home. So that's one solution. Rental housing may not be, but you also can encourage things like cottage-style development where you have smaller homes, sort of clustered in your traditional conservation subdivision. That might be an option as well. So while millennials and older generations may not want a 3,000 square foot home, they may be interested in one between 1,500 and 2,200 square feet. So you sort of cluster those and provide some conservation land too. So there are a lot of solutions out there, I think. And what I really hesitate to do when I go into a community is say, yeah, you gotta have rental housing, you gotta have it at a certain price point.
Right.
I mean, I think you should encourage that. I think you need a certain price point. And again, it's not only for millennials, it's for, you know, seniors on a fixed income, right? You know, if you want them to be able to remain in the community. But I don't think that, you know, rental housing or affordable housing is definitely a need in every community. I think that there's a reason that within statute that's a regional fair share thing. It's because the region really needs to provide it. So not everyone does.
Okay.
And again, I'm thinking now after this conversation, maybe a 5 to 10 minute presentation. I hesitate to say just 5 minutes because there's really a lot of information to cover. In fact, I think I'm talking for 5 minutes right now. So I would probably push it between the 5, 10, and 15 minutes just to sort of start things off. And there aren't answers to every question out there, and I hope people aren't expecting me to say, well, this is what New Durham should do. That's really up to the community, but there are some solutions out there that might be a good fit.
Well, I think that's the whole point, is
Yeah.
the forum is to have as much interchange with whoever attends as possible, A,
Right.
and then B, not so much saying, this is what you should do, but
Yeah.
here are potential options to think about.
Yeah. And I'm really gonna push the ADUs, and that's only because it really is a good fit for so many communities.
To push, what did you say?
Accessory dwelling units are
Yeah.
really, they're a great option, and obviously you'll have to adjust your zoning regardless to allow them, at least in the attached sense. But you may choose to go a bit farther than that and allow detached accessory dwelling units, and be more lenient with other regulations. And I can I'll actually probably talk about during that presentation briefly what the law actually prescribes and what the options might be, because I think that's important.
Would you be able to give like information that directly affects New Durham in terms of the demographics?
Yeah, so what I can definitely do, and I've already done this actually, I can provide some historical population information, some basic housing snapshot stuff. So really, what do you have on the ground right now? How many rental units do you have? How many owner-occupied
Right.
units do you have? And then I can also provide some population projections too.
Right.
And I can do some basic housing projections based on kind of your existing housing stock and what the projections look like.
Right.
And the numbers are what they are. I
Right.
won't go into it too much, but yeah, that can
Right.
be
No,
provided.
that's fine, because
Yeah.
I think people would want to know, I'd
Yeah.
want to know, we'd want to know
Right.
where
Yeah.
we stand before we make a decision and say we want our housing to do blah, blah, blah.
Right.
We need to know what the potential is.
The one challenge with presenting this in 2016 is that a lot of our data was based on 2010 decennial census numbers, so I would sort of introduce a caveat there that this is a snapshot in time, but it's the most accurate number that we have. We can use things like local building permits to supplement that information,
Yeah,
but
right.
I think at this particular forum, I'd probably stick to those decennial census
Yeah,
numbers.
because we would have things in our own files that
Yeah.
we could also look at
Exactly.
and put that in there too.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Office of Energy and Planning compiles building permits, and I'm sure that they have New Durham, so I could grab that from their data set and just put together a basic
Okay.
bar chart kind of thing.
Okay. Sounds
Great.
good.
Are you thinking that you'd like me to open the forum, or where would you like me to fit?
Yeah,
Probably
probably, yeah.
right after you start.
Introduce the topic,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah.
And
I
then
mean-
let,
Well, you.
The audience-
We might give,
The way we've done it before.
like a 2-minute synopsis, we've done transportation, we've done natural resources, we've done community well-beings, they're on the website.
Okay,
Well,
Just some 2 or 3 minute introductory stuff, and then.
okay.
I would think Scott would do that.
Yeah,
And just from I'm just saying because it's the
Yeah.
planning board who's presenting this.
yeah,
And you could give a recap, even though you
Yeah.
haven't been here, that's okay,
Right.
we'll catch you up.
yeah,
And then he could jump in after
Yeah.
and then say,
Right.
this is his gig and
right.
go from there.
And I can talk briefly about sort of why housing. I mean, obviously, it's not one of the mandated master plan chapters under state statute, but I think it's one that's really critical when you start to think about, not only existing land use, but future land use as
Right.
well. So it's,
Right.
I wouldn't let any community get away with not doing it
Yeah,
at this
no,
point in
I
time.
think it's a good idea that
Yeah.
we do it. I mean, we have, 2,000 acre something or other hanging around up there.
Right,
Potential development that could be.
right.
So what's the format of the forum? So how do
It's
we
gonna-
collecting information or?
I assume it's gonna be like
The
the
same.
previous ones.
Were you
The
here
one,
for
the first one you went to.
Were you here? No,
I wasn't
don't-
actually
he
here
wasn't
for.
here
I was
for
only
that
here for
one.
the discussion of
He
the
was here,
transportation one.
but he wasn't at the actual meeting.
Yeah, yep.
So, I forgot his name.
Colin was
Colin.
there.
Oh, that's right, you were,
Colin
that's
was
right, that's
there.
right, sorry.
Yeah, Colin came.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Basically, someone
Same
introduces
thing.
the topic, couple minutes.
Okay.
Then there's some speaker that gives a short presentation of what the current chapter shouldn't,
Yeah.
the kind of information that it will entail. And then we open it up to the floor, whoever has comments, questions.
basically.
And is Terry
But we
gonna
have
be our?
that format, right? So
Right.
that we're gonna follow still.
Right.
yeah, that would be at the conclusion of that. I mean,
Yeah, no, I
just to
mean,
kind of
same.
clarify, we've actually
wants to
done it
know.
in 2 different types of format. One of which has been sort of described here, and which has been a free flow, creative idea generation, that type of thing. And the other one was a little bit more prepared to help, guide through some thought processes. So either one works. It's really whatever you're comfortable with. We can
Okay.
work with either one, but we've done both.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So,
I mean, what I've done most of the time when I've had to do this kind of thing is, I like the free flow, but that doesn't always happen, so you always have some, what I call back pocket slides to fill in if you have to.
yeah, I guess what I'd be most comfortable with if the board is amenable to it is I can do a presentation, I can take questions and answer and have a sort of free flow discussion, but then if you have those structured slides at the end, I think it would be best if somebody on the board facilitates
Right.
actually completing that, if that's appropriate. And I can sort of lend assistance to that process, but I think you know best what you're looking for when it comes to the information on those slides. But I can certainly be available to just answer questions and help. How many people do you expect generally? Small group?
We've had
Never know.
anywhere from about 3 or 4 to about 30 or 40.
Okay.
30, I guess, for the transportation was like 30, something like
Yeah.
that.
How many were the last one? Not
There was only about 4 or 5. I think.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
The problem was it wasn't as well
It
advertised, I
wasn't as
think.
well advertised this time. Yeah.
Okay.
Also, people may have thought it was a little vague. If they just saw natural resources, they may not have.
Okay.
Water quality made,
But, yeah,
made people think differently of it.
Right.
It's just-
It's a
right.
fairly hot topic here these days.
You would
the way
think.
it works.
You
Yeah.
would think, but
Yeah.
it's also, they're out enjoying the natural resources too, so.
Yeah.
Right, okay,
Okay.
all right.
And how long? An hour?
Yeah,
Hour
it
and a
was
half,
kind
yeah,
of like.
something like
I
A
don't
little
think it-
flexible, but certainly probably not more than that.
Would you like me to send my presentation? Can I do a PowerPoint? Is that
Yep.
possible? I think that's really.
Yep, absolutely.
That's
green
Send it
rules.
right
Okay,
Stop.
yeah, so much of this stuff is visual, I think it's
Mhm.
important.
Might want to bring it on a separate stick also.
I
Oh,
came with redundancy, and I always have things about 3 or 4 places.
Yeah, a separate stick.
That's a
What I'll do is I'll bring
disaster.
an older computer just in case
Yeah.
there's some
Yeah,
hookup glitch.
I can do that. I'll bring my laptop too.
okay, Mr. Oliver?
Could I just ask Matt
Sure.
a question on this topic? You mentioned that this region is in virtual stagnation, I think, or close to it. There's a lot of regions in the U.S. that have not only recovered from the '07 recession, but have gone beyond, and both in sale median prices and in numbers of units sold. Now, New Hampshire to some extent, is a secondary housing market. It's vacation homes and that kind of thing. So often we trail other areas and we're late to recover. But it seems like this is more than that.
Yeah.
What's going on with New Hampshire that we're so far behind some of these other areas? Is it just rural character secondary homes, or is there more going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's more going on. I would say that the regulatory environment doesn't always lend itself to housing growth and development here. I mean, I think traditionally the structure that we've set up here doesn't facilitate the large scale development that you see in states like, I'm trying to think of one that's comparable, Colorado. If you fly into Denver airport, you see these massive subdivisions everywhere. We just don't really, our regulatory environment doesn't facilitate that. I think at the same time, a lot of those areas that recovered quicker after the recession were more urbanized areas, closer to employment centers. And unfortunately, New Hampshire, because of its limited incentives for commercial growth and business growth, we haven't really grown in that way, and I think that's really hurt our residential growth as well. So I think there are a lot of factors at play, but I think the one thing that we really have working for us, obviously, is our quality of life. And I know that's sort of a cliche that's out there a lot right now, but it's one of the key things that can attract people, and the reality is it's one of the key things that can attract business, especially in this climate. Businesses increasingly are looking for quality of life for their workers too. So I think that's sort of New Hampshire's competitive advantage going forward. But as far as why we haven't recovered as quick, I think there are a lot of factors involved with that.
Certainly, it's a great interest to me. Why
Yeah.
us?
Mhm.
Everybody else is doing better. Why
Yeah.
us? What's going on?
And I do think there's something to the fact that our public transportation system, our transportation system, a lot of our services and infrastructure aren't set up to allow people to sort of operate in their millennial state here or age here, and I think that hurts us in a lot of ways, especially moving forward.
Now, when you're talking housing stock, you're talking new construction?
I think everything, existing housing stock, new housing stock. I do think that new housing stock is a little more conscious of the shift in housing preference. I think, and you can see developments in a lot of areas, like especially those that are more suburban, like Exeter, Newmarket, Dover. They're sort of riding the trend of that cottage-style development and rental housing is attractive, but I think that all housing stock is really important. Even the single-family housing stock here in New Durham that may attract a family, you need to make sure it's actually appropriate for that. I think that's important.
Okay.
That's great. Any other questions I answer now, or questions I'm prepared to answer then too? So that's a good.
One part of housing that I've developed a bit of an interest in from a permaculture point of view is tiny houses.
Yeah.
Is what did you say?
Tiny houses.
Yeah.
It so happens that there's a forum in, I think, Wolfboro the night before this forum
Yep.
that I plan on going to.
Okay.
I can pull up that.
I will say that
if you
tiny
want.
house regulation is not, I do not know too much about it, so I can
Right.
brush up on that a little bit before the meeting.
Right, well, that's something that right now New Durham really doesn't allow. I think 500 square feet is our minimum for a house, and tiny houses are usually smaller than that.
Or
So-
they could be that.
Wow.
So, tiny houses are tiny houses.
Okay.
Sometimes they're mobile. Often they use composting toilets and solar. Often they're completely off grid. So
How are they different from yours? Or,
they're rigid construction,
okay.
2x4 or whatever construction, but instead of a cloth, a yurt is basically a cloth construction with weak wood frame, I'll call it. Plus a yurt is disassemblable.
Yeah.
You can take it down in a day.
Yeah. I'll do some more research on that. I'm not really sure if any communities have tackled regulating them,
Yeah.
other than as accessory monuments. So
Yeah.
I'll look into it.
Yeah, so I don't know
Yeah.
how we would handle it. We would have to basically write a completely separate paragraph, I think.
I think you would.
I don't know how we would, it gets sticky because it's a tiny house can be mobile, can be on wheels, on a trailer. So is it a trailer? Is it a mobile home, or is it a tiny house?
But
What's the difference?
if it's on wheels, then it would be considered a trailer.
Yeah,
And then don't we have restrictions for that? That
We
you
do.
can't have a trailer on a lot for more than 2 weeks at any
yeah,
given time?
especially on the lake. I think elsewhere in town, I think you can, but on the lakefront, we've limited that.
I don't know.
It's actually anywhere.
I didn't think
Is
it
it
was
everywhere?
just, I
read
don't,
it, 'cause
I don't think
had
it was,
complaints about it on the lake specifically, but
But is it everywhere?
we
I
actually
think
have
it's
an issue
everywhere.
with that regulation that I'd like it to be reevaluated, because there's no real teeth behind it, according to the building inspector.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
oh,
but that might be part of the larger conversation.
right, so, those are things, because we had a discussion, someone came in wanting to put up a yurt on a property, and we didn't know what to do with it.
So what did you do with it?
we said no, no.
I think
We left it
When
to
in
the
doubt, you say no.
building inspector, and he said, okay.
Yeah,
Because
He
he
said,
has
okay,
certain
'cause it's off the
regulations,
grid.
right?
yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think they wanted electricity, if I remember right.
I believe so as well. I thought it was electric and they would be plumbed, from what
Yeah.
I understood.
That's what I remember,
Well,
yeah.
then we're talking a different year, okay.
Oh, really?
Okay, then there may
We're-
be two.
No, did you think
Wasn't
it
there
was?
somebody that asked you if they
No,
could
the
use your
que-
land?
Yeah.
Yeah, to
Yeah.
put a yurt?
We actually had the question on septic. I don't think that was ever answered.
Oh, it wasn't.
She was on compost.
So-
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the ADUs.
Yeah.
Is there any provision, or is it now completely allowable for someone to build a separate house on their land and rent it out because it isn't
No.
tied to a family member?
No,
Or-
No, so the original legislation stipulated that detached was allowed as well, but now with the actual passed legislation, you're only required to allow attached units. So you wouldn't be able to build a completely accessory structure that has no connection at all to the primary residence.
Okay.
Yeah. Which is a good protection for communities, I think. And I think the idea in the end was to sort of ease this in and give communities the flexibility to be a little more aggressive with it if they chose to.
Okay, all right, understood. And then, but there is no oversight as to who occupies that. You can rent it
Well-
out, you can,
Well,
It's
there
in-
are some restrictions. You
Yeah.
can restrict on the relationship between the occupants within that unit. So this was a protection for college towns. So you can say no more than 4 unrelated individuals can live in there, but you cannot require that the primary unit and the accessory unit, that those two are related.
parties be
Yeah.
related.
Right.
Correct.
Okay.
Right, but didn't the homeowner have to be in one of the units?
So the homeowner has to be, the property owner has to be in one of the units, but it doesn't stipulate whether it's the accessory or the primary.
Yeah,
Right.
no, and that's good, that's good.
Right.
And I'll review that in detail at the meeting too,
Right.
because I think that's an important one. You're gonna be adjusting your ordinance to allow for that.
Right.
And the community has the ability to allow it through either by right or by special exception or by permit. So you have some flexibility there too. You know, Northwood, where I'm the planner, we have it as a special exception, and we're not really gonna change too much, except for the square footage threshold. It's now a part of the law as well.
Okay. All right. And do they need to tie into the same septic and water
So
supply where they're?
the septic system, the same isn't really, I don't think the same is necessarily the right wording, but they have, the septic system and the well have to be
Yeah,
adequate to add them on.
It has to accommodate
Yep.
the space.
Correct.
Okay.
There are really quite a few protections, and that really came out of, New Durham's a great example. When you have waterfront property, people were concerned that accessory dwelling units would pop up above every garage and on every home,
Right.
and there would be no way to protect against nutrient loading. Well, this is a way to do that, and it's actually a great way because it allows for additional review if necessary by code enforcement or DES, whoever chooses to do that.
And it doesn't actually take effect until June of next year.
Correct. You know, if you don't pass it, then